good at simulated a face-to-face meeting.
Yeah, yeah.
I thought, wow, you're 80-90% of the way. But I haven't really like online, tried to be friends with someone that only through Skype. I mean, I don't know. Once at a corporate job, I kind of learned that relationships that you've never met in person just don't work like an in-person relationship that you're talking on the phone.
Yeah.
But I've never tried that with Skype, so.
Yeah. Well, it's very true. It's seeing a face is better than not seeing a face, but being in person is better than just doing this. There's just more sensory data, so
More bandwidth, I say.
Yeah. But I greatly prefer this to just talking on the phone. You just get so much more information seeing the person's facial responses. It helps you contextualize the words that they're using, especially if you don't know someone or you're meeting them for the first time. It really helps.
Yeah, interesting. So I scheduled this short because, not knowing quite how this works, I thought we might have kind of a meta conversation, because sort of through email, I can't quite tell what's interesting to you, and I want to be respectful of your time and sort of not go in directions that are, where I'm dragging you along the trail instead of something that might be mutually interesting. And so I might ask you a little bit about your channel and your interest in Jordan Peterson, and because we have a lot in common. I mean, I like you, right? I like what you're doing. And, I wish I could come to your church or take you up on your lunch meeting offer, because I think we'd, very high in openness. So I think we'd have things.
I think we'd hit it off. I can see that already.
Yeah.
So what are your questions? Go for it. I'm not too, I can go to 3:00. That isn't a problem. So my schedule's gotten very strange since I've started all this. So and back in the day before YouTube, I had way more time, but it's just the way it is now. So
So why are you doing this? I thought
that's a good question.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, I'm sort of wondering the same thing, I'm not going to Sacramento anytime real soon, but so it's an experiment.
Well, this in terms of the Jordan Peterson videos or the conversations or what?
Yeah, maybe see those all quite separately. I thought it might be a combination of, you're genuinely interested in trying to figure out some of these things, and what I found fascinating about him was not so much what he was saying, because, I was in the Boy Scouts, and a lot of this is kind of, this is a little traditional, Boy Scouts, they didn't care, they didn't check they didn't really check and see if you'd said your prayers, but, it was to God in the country, they left that up fuzzy, but
yeah.
It was in there,
Yeah.
And a lot of what he's saying is, I went to, the meetup group here, and I kind of said, a lot of this, 30 years ago would have been kind of boring. It's very straightforward.
Yeah, that's true.
Clean up your room, kid.
Yeah, that's true.
Get your act together. And so it's more, there's a bunch of questions and context around what is going on right now.
Yeah.
And I got interested in your channel specifically because, kind of what Dallas Willard calls end of moral knowledge. It's like the church has really got to be the institution that owns that property,
Yeah.
So I got interested in the Bible lectures, and it sort of recultivated, an interest in more the moral knowledge stuff which the more, well, this is a completely different direction maybe, but the more I kind of go to churches it's kind of like they seem to have lost that as completely too. It's my sense is the institution's so weak that it's really following the culture like a dog on a leash, and
yeah.
If you agree with that, maybe something we could talk about is like, like how do you try to be a Christian in that kind of environment, without, as you said, I mean, I'm not taking offense, but it's kind of true, without being kind of a hobby Christian, like you're not putting this into much practice, you alone in your room and you and your Bible.
Yeah. That's very true. So there's there's just different aspects of Peterson. The thing that hooked me originally was much more, I could see that people were becoming compelled that the Bible had authority, but Peterson's approach towards biblical authority was from below instead of from above. And that to me was new, because culturally, the way things have been going for a few hundred years already is a lot of skepticism about any kind of authority from above. And so science over, for the last couple hundred years, science has afforded authority from below. And so Peterson, and so we'd hear, well, the Bible can't be trusted with information because of Darwin, because of geology, because of all these things. And Peterson comes along and says, but I'm making a case for the Bible because of Darwin. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And I had heard Christians try to do this before with some fairly simplistic concordism, but Peterson's approach was via psychology. And he was making a very compelling argument that for example, the presence of a serpent in the garden was not accidental, that there are deep roots for this in our formation. And I'd never heard anybody make that before. So that's what initially got me going on this. And then I wanted to explore the medium, because I'd been rereading Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death. And I actually just read that book again last week. The book, the contention of the book is that each medium can only bear a certain epistemology within it. And Neil Postman wrote that book during the 80s when television was coming online, or television was already well online and cable was just starting to come. And he was saying basically what this television as an entertainment device, great thing. But as an information device that can actually educate or especially form the nation politically, is a disaster. And we've seen similar things with respect to religion. And so here was Peterson doing this stuff. And I was reading in comment sections and on Reddit and in all kinds of places, all these people listening to him saying things like, I used to be an atheist and now I'm curious about Christianity. And I thought, that's strange, because he's not a TV preacher. So what is it about the medium? So then I started making YouTubes, and then people started watching my channel and writing back to me. And then it's like, well, I can't stop making videos now. I mean, people are saying that I'm helpful to them and I'm having fun. And so I just decided I would continue to make videos that are basically thinking out loud and presenting the kinds of questions that I've been interested in. And as the project has continued, I've become more and more interested in really the philosophical aspect of it, the roots of us knowing and epistemology. And so I've been focusing on that with the Sam Harris stuff. So, and then of course, people would email me, and, I'm a pastor, and people write me and say, I'm trying to figure out church. Well, what am I supposed to say? I'm a pastor in Sacramento. Go away, find someone local. On those rare Sundays that I am in town, and because I'm on vacation, I don't want to go to Livingstone's, because the minute I walk in the door, I'm no longer on vacation. and I look for a church to go to, and I don't go to one of our church plants where I know the pastors, I try to look around and say, now what church would I go to? And it's a disaster. You'd think in a American city like Sacramento, I could find a church that I would be happy to attend myself. And I haven't looked that hard, and I don't have really time to shop because I'm always busy on Sundays. But my impression is it's a disaster out there. And so when people write to me and they ask me questions and they want to talk about things which I, as a pastor, it's my job to talk with people about, I just decided this is my calling. Now, I haven't quite figured out how to make it all work, because I do want people to, there is, just like we began the conversation, if you go to a local congregation, it's not like talking on a video chat. It is the way it's supposed to be, with life on life and relationships and people. But that is so hard right now. And their Christianity has gotten so nichey. And also, as you said, the institution's so weak. I've had a number of conversations with people who, even the churches they attend, they're just struggling. And they tell me I'm helpful, so I don't want to stop helping. But now I face a scale problem in terms of how many people can I help.
Yeah.
And so that's how this whole project has grown.
So it's a little bit of, there's an element of evangelism kind of in there.
Sure. Absolutely. And so one of the things, so there's really, it's kind of shaped into three aspects. Of course, I've got my congregation at Living Stones, and then I've got kind of the YouTube cyber thing, but I also have an in-house meetup where 20, 30, 40 people from Sacramento come to these meetings. And at this point, we're just doing conversations. We're looking to kind of scale up and add some more programming to that, because, and many of these people aren't Christians. Many of them don't believe in God, but they're saying, I can't go anywhere else and have these kinds of conversations where I can speak my mind. No one's going, I don't lose status saying something unpopular. And we're working stuff out together. And the thing that frustrates me is that so often the church is the last place you could do that. And that just breaks my heart, because I think churches should be the kind of place where you can go in and say, you know what? This is how I was raised. This is what happened in my life. This is what I believe right now. I just want to do some processing. And you don't go to a therapist for that. You know, you go to a therapist for other things. But where can you work on this stuff?
Yeah. So I have some things I could say about all that.
I'd love to hear it.
And it's partly, I see you've talked about, I might ask you a little bit, what do you think Jordan Peterson's project is?
I was actually thinking I should do a little bit of writing, because he's got a number of projects. It's clear that he is looking to help people who are suffering from nihilism. That's one project. Nihilism in the secular age. Another project is, especially young men are really struggling in this culture right now. And that, to me, is obvious. Most of the people who talk to me online and come to my meetups are men in their 20s and 30s and 40s. And, you know, many of them have jobs, and, you know, according to the world, they pay their taxes. They're doing okay. They're not in jail, but where can they go to work on their stuff in life? You know, and they don't really need a therapist, but they don't need a 12-step program. They need something. So that's an element of his project. Another piece of his project is maps of meaning. He's trying to sort out where science fits in and morality fits in. So that's really with the Sam Harris thing. So he's got a number of things going, and that is kind of a social political against, you know, these new identity tribalisms that are taking over the political process. I think those are his main agendas.
Setting back the bloody neo-Marxist postmodernists.
It's That's right. Ontological crisis, existential dread, bloody postmodernism, cultural Marxism, identity politics, and moral relativism.
Hurrah!
Hurrah!
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's probably consistent with what I was going to say, although it's completely different words. So let me say those words and see if you think, huh? It's that quote of his that I put it on a comment and you liked it on your YouTube channel. That, he said, we live in a time of extraordinary conflict between all our different levels that are all dissociated. We think things that we don't say. We say things that we don't dream. We act out things that we don't believe. And I see that in people now. They switch levels and they like totally change personality almost.
Yeah.
And like I realized they've just I tripped a different level and now they're a different person.
Yep.
It's almost kind of like I've had a lot of exposure to psychology and read a lot of it, and I've done a lot of group work, led a lot of groups, and I was thinking I've had a little bit of contact with people that genuinely have dissociative identity disorder, and they literally do that. And it's just, so I totally get what he's saying. It does really strike me that, and it's like and then he says that the solution, the cure is a integrated system of belief and representation. And that's coming back again. It's like, I agree with you. I think the church should be an environment where that can kind of happen. And much of that, our layers and stuff, I would say, are very intimate. And the family environment would be the place where that would happen a lot with children, because many of our layers and stuff get built up through childhood development. And they're very implicit. So we act these, like he says, that Piaget stuff, but we act these things out before we really articulate them.
Yeah.
So your parents are the ones that are with you and observing your acting out and kind of saying, what are you doing with that? And what are you doing over there? We had this conversation, you can't do that. And now you're kind of like trying to sneak that in, or, all the crazy things that kids kind of do. And so then getting back to the church, I really see that the family is kind of how I think about those levels and all these conversations and all this representational stuff. The church, then this metaphor goes all through the church, I think. And you know the Bible and the church better than I do. And like I've said, I think I kind of said, I've never even gone to church much in my adult life. So maybe I got this all wrong. So tell me.
No, you have it all right.
So the church, the metaphor goes all the way up. The father is the head of the family. Jesus Christ is the head of the church. The church is the bride of Christ. The church, now I guess what? Different denominations do this all sort of differently, but there is a thread of hierarchy. The Pope is the head of the church. The deacons, the elders. Most churches have some kind of leadership kind of like that. And so then it's kind of like I think of the church as being everyone within sort of that hierarchy. It's kind of like a meta family where the families come together and, like best practices get kind of called out. And I wish there was almost I don't know church culture very well, but it's almost like a kind of a group therapy kind of thing where churches come together and like, how do we talk about this transgender kind of issue? Or how do we talk about like recovering from a death in the family, or, that there's just some sharing about that in the context of, biblical tradition. And that, because I guess I grew up in a really dysfunctional, problematic family, and many things from my childhood. I've struggled my whole life to try to um, develop an understanding, as Peterson sort of says. But one of the ways I really did that, the group work, was in my 20s, early 20s, I started going to men's groups. And I just learned so much by listening, observing other people talk about things that were never discussed in my family. And how I could never have done that on my own, and I couldn't have read it in a book, right? It's not that kind of knowledge. But I mean, I just heard men openly kind of talking about their feelings about whatever, like a fight with a boss or this kind. My dad never did that kind of stuff. So again, coming back to the church, it's kind of trying to build up everyone having those kinds of conversations, depending on, hopefully there'd be some recognition of who's the best person maybe to talk this out with. Someone that's gone through it, and it maybe is admired, or however that works. But that's kind of what I meant. I mean, I made a comment to you about churches as from a mental health perspective. There's ways of looking at families, like I think I mentioned don't talk, like the adult children of alcoholic and dysfunctional families have like the 3 Ds, They say in dysfunctional families, there's rules like you don't talk, you don't talk about what's going on, you don't talk, you don't trust, you don't feel, there's a lot of just roteness. There's no joy, I think in the Bible they call that the fruits of the Spirit,
That's right. That's right.
And there's lots of denial. So, a lot of churches, I guess, they kind of strike me that way.
Yeah. If you're attuned to that stuff and you go to a church, you'll see plenty.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess a lot of times I get hostility back, and then they just scare me. I have a hard time going back because I don't see. I mean, I'm not a fan of the Jesus as sort of warm, cuddly teddy bear kind of guy.
Well, then you've been reading your Bible, because he's not that way.
No, don't say it when you're asked. If you're too far out of line. No, I mean, I don't think there's both, right?
That's right. That's right. That's right. He welcomes the little children, but if you get the vision of him, like say in the first chapter of the book of Revelation, I mean, his face is shining like the sun. He's got a 2-edged sword coming out of his mouth. He's got eyes like laser beams, like the Truth Club guy always puts in. And so he's a lion and a lamb. And it's these kind of, and Jonathan Edwards talked about these discordant qualities that come together in Jesus, and they're both. And that's in a sense when Jordan Peterson talks about archetypal. That's that character, but in Jesus they can both come in together, integrated in the same person. Yeah. I loved how you framed the church there, and I have. I've read plenty of ecclesiology, which is the theology of the church, but I don't know if I've heard someone frame it as succinctly and aptly for our particular cultural context now as you just kind of laid down. That was very impressive. I don't think I could have done it.
Oh, well, good.
So I am recording this, and I will send you a copy. And what has been happening is I record it, I send the people a copy, and they say, well, I don't know if I want you to post it. And then about a week or two later, they run by, they say, you didn't post it yet. So, so we'll record it, and then you can ponder the conversation. But I think you have just framed so much in a tiny, short amount of time that is so apt that I think you're exactly right. The church is sort of a meta family where no individual family, because of its size, can really have enough wisdom, enough bandwidth, enough of anything to really give that family everything it needs. And so ideally, in the context of a church, it's a meta family. So there are every household has its own unhappiness and dysfunction. And the idea is that in a church, well, now some of those we can, those D's, I thought I'd never heard that, but that was dead on. It's another D. It was dead on. It was, you were listing that, and I'm thinking, that's exactly right. And ideally, in the church, these kinds of things could be worked on. And this is why, Peterson's observation that at the top of the hierarchy is the logos, and the logos is the place where, basically where speech transforms chaos into order. And ideally, in a church, that's what should be happening. But as you said, in many churches, don't talk, pastors don't want parishioners to talk. People don't want the other people to talk. People don't want to be named or called on their things. And sometimes the naming and calling people on things is done in that's such a hard thing to do well. And it requires so much.
Yes. And our environment, now maybe that's a segue into something else I've been trying to kind of hone my language around, but it seems like the church has ceded like whole continents of conversational territory to different disciplines or different people outside the church, viewed as outside the church. And politics would be, I don't know what politics is anymore. I mean, it seems to be sort of everything and nothing. But I mean, a lot of our social issues have been politicized, so it's impolite to kind of bring up social issues. I mean, this church I was visiting, I went to the Bible study and I kind of hit on some hot button issues, but I was explaining them as, we see these things as political, but there's like a spiritual malaise underneath them, in the way that, you're either anti-gay or or pro-gay marriage. And it's like, well, but how do you really, I mean, I don't see that the level that the church should be really engaging on that issue with. And there's a whole lot of stuff complicated and stuff going on there. And some of those details should be discussed, but it just seems like to politicize it has really been a disaster. And it's maybe, I don't know if that could ever be avoided, or because I mean it's been foisted on the church too, kind of. But as you say, it's created kind of the blue church and the red church, which is like, I don't know, or like which books in the Bible are the red books? I don't think that works,
No.
I don't think we can do that, and I don't see life. And I'm pretty independent, and I don't like, especially like right now, I really, I guess I can say this if you air this, but like I'm not a big fan of any of our politicians right now.
Yeah, well, you're not alone.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess that's not probably the one thing that would unite us.
I mean, if there had been a third option on there were plenty of third-party candidates. I voted for a third-party candidate, but if you could have said Trump, Clinton, or neither, I think neither would have won. The only problem is neither. You need a president, so you can't go with neither. But I think neither would have beat both of them. That's just my feeling. But no, I think you've got a lot of wisdom on this stuff. And it's, if I were a pastor in your geographical area, I'd probably be recruiting you, because to me, a lot of what you've described here is so true. figuring out, because you can sit and you can dream about, well, how to fix this stuff. Well, the truth is, just like you've talked about in men's groups and stuff, you don't fix anything just by thinking about it. Thinking is a part of the process, but you fix it by doing, and you fix it by acting, and you fix it at the local level, because in many ways that's the most real level of the church. Because that's the face-to-face relationships, and you have structures and hierarchies, and you need those, but the real things are at the local level.
Exactly.
And it's only in practice that things actually begin to start getting straightened out. But that's, and this is, again, part of Peterson's mission. He sees his mission as, if individuals sort themselves out, the community will be better. And that's true. There also is community leadership, and those leaders also have to act well, because you can have people behaving well in a community and messed up leadership, and that's a mess too. So it's amazing that anything ever works.
Sometimes, so there's just a way, even through making mistakes, people home in together on kind of better solutions. So, there's a mystery to life, the way that, the leaders can be bad sometimes, and sometimes the people asking for help the leaders by getting their help, it backfires on them, and they realize that what they're doing wrong or something.
That's right.
So it's this kind of more, I don't know, it's this sort of meta family, I'm calling it, where everyone's kind of working together, but in a way that's synergistic or something, that's that the tradition has to be the same. I think it does go kind of haywire if, I guess sometimes, that's where, what I'm trying to say is that the tradition they have to have a common language maybe together. There has to be some common structure.
And someone had, in one of my comments or someone on Facebook had said, well, I have, he had made the comment, I have problems with the creedal church, that you have to believe things. And I thought about that, because on one hand, if you read the New Testament, almost every description of Judgment Day has us judged by what we do. And I've thought about that for a long time, especially in my theological tradition, which Calvinism has tended to lean towards, well, you're judged by what you believe, not by what you do. And so that reality is very complicated in my tradition. But that comment on Facebook made me think about the fact that the complicated relationship between words and behaviors. And just like you said, now you need a common story, and we don't really know how that story governs our behavior. We're not that conscious of ourselves, but that same story, and we see this in a nation, that's part of the reason politics are such a mess, is because stories are in flux. Which story is the story of us? And when we aren't straight on that story, we don't know how to relate to ourselves, and we don't know how to interpret events, because once you have a common story, new events get filtered by that story, and that shapes therefore their meaning, and that meaning then shapes the behaviors and actions going forward of the community. And so just like I think earlier on, when you kind of gave this beautiful integrated vision for what the church should be, where it's integrated, and right now churches are out of whack, politics is out of whack, and again, how you said it earlier, the way you described it, I couldn't have said it better. All the layers are not in alignment, and so there's anxiety, there's depression, there's conflict, and then the question is, well, how to get alignment? Well, that's, I suppose, what we're working on.
Yeah, I think the alignment's going to be difficult, but the talking, like I was quite put off by this recent church experience, the sort of silence I got when I was sort of I was floating some of these ideas and sort of some Peterson-esque, the basics I thought, which I thought would really resonate with people, that the Bible's got a theme of truth and love, and truth is articulated. It's expanded. It's the logos. So that's why we have the books are full of truth. Love is acted out, and it's a little hard to pin down exactly what love is. That conversation with Peterson and Harris, that got interesting when they switched to love. I really perked up my ears, because Peterson talks a lot about truth, but he doesn't talk for hours about what love is. And everyone knows that love is hugely important. It is such a force, and you can't really pin it down very easily, right? But we all have a love detector sort of that works really well. And we get really unhappy when that's like reading zero, right?
That's right.
And you can see, like, you really reacted to like some of Sam's stuff, because I think your love detector kind of just, didn't move, and I don't know whether that's accurate or not, because Sam strikes me as kind of he's a pretty thinky kind of guy, maybe that's just kind of his personality, and it comes out differently. I don't know him, so I'm not saying anything against him, but it's just hard. I think love needs to be expressed and acted out a lot, and I don't think it's quite the same thing as truth, which is much more of you have to work at that. I mean, you work at love, but you learn about. I think you learn truth. I think that's why the moral knowledge. Dallas Willard talks about effort. Put some effort into learning this. It's not something that you just get by walking in the door of the church or something. And we might touch on moral. Dallas Willard. I just got his book, Hearing God, and he's a very interesting person.
But he is.
So I mean, a direction we might go is sort of like how do you troll around, Christian culture? I've been sort of visiting churches and not having a lot of happiness, I guess, doing that. But but there's all sorts of things out there, And Dallas Willard is, he's deep, boy. He's got a series of talks about what is truth and stuff, and it sounds so much like Peterson, but
yeah,
his language is, just it's unabashedly Christian,
Yeah.
He's a really funny talk where, he was giving a talk in a university setting, and someone in the audience kind of challenged him, and I guess they were kind of sarcastic, but they kind of said, like, so you're a professor here, and you really think the university should be telling students to follow Jesus Christ? And he kind of looked at them and said, well, who else did you have in mind? It's really funny. But it was just, he's not an agnostic like Peterson, as you say, whatever Peterson is.
Yeah.
So, but like Dallas Willard, he was in the Baptist evangelical circles, and has he been visible in other mainline traditions, or is he viewed uniformly positively, or you're grinning, so I guess not.
Well, I've been reading his biography of him, which just came out quite recently. And he grew up in Southern Baptist circles. But when he went to California, he started associating with Quakers. And, Quakers they're an interesting part of the church, partly because they, if a guy's out there saying, I don't want a creedal church, well, you should probably look for a group of Quakers, because they're about as,
I've been to a
yeah,
number of Quaker meetings and known Quakers, and
yeah. Parker Palm was another Quaker. And so then he got into, Dallas Willard's kind of hard to categorize as a Christian. So he starts out Southern Baptist, and then he's associating with Quakers, and that's where he meets Richard Foster. And so together they're doing, celebration of disciplines, and Richard Foster goes on, he's a Quaker pastor, goes on to write some other things. But then there's also this Pentecostal aspect to Dallas Willard that comes through with things. And then his program is really very monkish, where he's talking about spiritual disciplines and formation. And so Dallas Willard is this weird kind of contemporary Christian that doesn't really fit in any of the traditions, but seems to be able to appropriate many of them in a very integrated sort of way. And so I don't find, there is kind of a, the Renovare tribe that was out there when Willard was alive, that was kind of the Willard tribe. But how to locate them in the denominational patchwork, it doesn't really fit. So then they kind of like an evangelical group, just kind of float around, because in America, with this market orientation and the individualism, we've created this thing called, neo-evangelicalism, where churches are just kind of floating, these non-denominational things. And that's convenient because they're very flexible and can go here and there. That's troublesome because they can go here and there, and they don't deal with time well. And so they're just churches of a moment. And whoever the senior pastor is now, that's what's hot. And so they're very American in that sense. So Willard is just kind of moving through this thing, and he's a philosophy prof at USC. So, I'd love him to be a poster child, but how to fit him in, you never know.
And are there kind of doctrinal tensions where people are afraid of him because he's not quite towing the line correctly? Or
I've never heard a single tribe really take shots at him. But I think that's partly because even though in some ways he was a celebrity in the American Christian atmosphere, he never, he never really got rooted someplace, so someone, felt they needed to pick a fight with him. So that's why he just kind of floats, and nobody really shoots at him, because I think people don't know what to do with him. So if they don't like him, they ignore him. That's my take anyway.
Mm-hmm. So this will be sound a little provocative, but it sounds maybe it'll be funny. But one of the buccos on the Reddit forum, who I noticed his post because I thought he just was. We had a lot of common ground, but there was a lot of wisdom in this guy. But he started up kind of talking about his project was to go to churches, and he viewed the church as something, like, this is our Father we need to rescue from the belly of the world. So he was really blogging and talking about that. But it makes me want to ask, kind of segue into like, what are some tips or places to look or questions, like within Christian culture that I might use or talk about? Like, you've turned me on to Dallas Willard, but are there movements or conversations that you can refer to to get certain kinds of things going? Is there kind of a converse question, like, are there doctrinal issues that, like, don't get into that because, that's a fight going on right now, and you'll wade into the fight. Like, what I mean by kind of, like my naivete to some of this, I don't really understand what Calvinism is exactly, and all I kind of understood is that it split off from Lutheranism, and I was raised Lutheran. So I kind of was reading it, and I thought, oh, I get it. So Paul and I are supposed to be enemies somehow.
Calvinists and Lutherans get along just fine.
Oh, yeah, okay.
The distinction between Calvin and Luther tended to be Calvin tried to rescue the Old Testament father from the pit by the third use of the law. So there are some other differences. But, when you were talking earlier and I was thinking about a number of our email conversations, I was imagine, especially I think your great analogy about the church and the family. Imagine if you were a teenager and you were orphaned and your family didn't basically assign you anywhere. And so you lived in a small town. And so the mayor of the town said, well, Allan, you go pick a family. And I think in some ways, where we have located churches culturally does us a disservice, because while there are some churches that are like large organizations, those are the mega churches. They are big box stores, and they put their wares right on the front side. We offer great music, wonderful childcare, TED Talks with the Bible, bang, here we go. Most churches would be more like, well, how would you shop for a family? Well, right away you see, if you approach it in that way, it would never work, because what you really have to do is get into the family. And then people say, well, how do I get into a church? And I usually tell people, well, it's both very easy and sometimes kind of slow. The way you get into the church is you go there every week. and the difficulty is that there are options. And so you can pick better or worse, but you go there every week, and maybe for a few weeks people ignore you and they don't seem to know what to do with you, and you don't fit in. Well, that would be like the child kind of coming into a family. Well, nobody knows what to do with each other for a while, but then something happens and you can't predict it. They need you for some reason, or you need them for some reason, and then a connection gets made, and then from that connection the relationship starts to grow. And I think that's a better picture for if someone says, I want to get into a church. I mean, people have asked me before, well, how do I get into your church? Come every week. They're like, so then they start coming for a few weeks and they're waiting for something to happen. I think, no, it's more like a family, not Costco. So, and then, it might take a couple of years, and they look at me like, what are you, out of your mind? A couple of years? Yeah, probably. Because again, if you were a child coming into a family, it just takes time. And the problem is families are together every day. Churches are together 1 or 2 or 3 days a week. So the clock is that much slower. So, but then the question is, well, which one should I? Well, that's really hard. And, if you want to, if we decide to post this, if you wanted to say around the geographical area you live, it could be that somebody in this Jordan Peterson sphere will listen to you. Because if you lived in Sacramento, I'd say, oh, please come to Living Stones, because I can hear your wisdom, and I can, but you've also, just like you've got wisdom, and you've also got rough edges to you, just like every other person, and just like a child coming into the family. Well, those rough edges are going to be discovered. And the thing is, once you're on the inside of a church, then when you start saying things that don't match theologically or are heretical or nobody wants to hear, people listen and they just kind of shrug. And even in the most confessional churches, I've seen people pass up huge heresies just because they're like, well, yeah, he's a heretic, but he's our heretic, and we love him, so we trust him. And that's a church.
Yeah, that sounds very human, Um, hmm. Yeah, no, the area. I mean, that I guess I'm not that shy about that. It's Minneapolis, St. Paul, and so there should be, a lot of Lutheran churches to choose from. In fact, that's true. I mean, I don't know how many there are.
Maybe even a Calvinist one or two. I can, if there are more CRC pastors than Lutheran pastors watch my site, so you might even get a phone call from a Calvinist, and they're not, depending on. Well, I won't get into denominational things, but and even with denominations, it's just like a family. There's so much there, and it's so nuanced, and so much of it is so beneath the surface. If I walk into a church, usually if I look around, pretty quickly I can kind of peg where they are on the map by whose books are in their library, who's the pastor quoting, what kind of thing is he saying. But that's because it's kind of my business. But so there's that aspect to it. But at the same time, every single church is unique. And just like you said, some of them are dysfunctional, unhappy places. And yeah, you wouldn't want to join that family. But others of them are quirky, strange, not altogether well functioning. But the more you're there, you begin to see, these people really love each other. And there are some good people. And in every church, you're going to find a few gems. Then you're going to find a few folks that are, they've never gotten it for 40 years, but they're still part of the family and we're still working together on them. But in a church, you need both, because that's how the saints become saints, by pouring themselves out for the basket cases. And that's so, but at the same time, if you didn't grow up in the family, to come into a family, so terribly hard. That's why I'm fortunate, because I grew up in the CRC and I'm still here.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've sometimes, kind of noticed who seems to be kind of promoted. I mean, sometimes it's alarming what's kind of coming down from on high in the church. That's, I guess, the sermons that I just can't live with, or
well, in all fairness, that's partly your issue too.
Yeah. So, and that is something I've sort of thought about, but
I never have that problem, because I'm usually the one preaching.
You love your sermons.
Right? I love my sermons. Well, so actually not all of them. Some sermons are like, oh, I hope no one remembers this.
You're done with it, and you're like, the only good thing about this is it's never going to be told again.
That's right. Well,
yeah.
and church, when my grandfather was pastoring, churches went through pastors about every 4 to 6 years. And what was beautiful about that system was, if you kind of had a lousy preacher, well, he'd move on. And maybe you'll get a good one next. But the church was the community of people, and they all knew that. And what has happened in churches with this consumerization of the church is that the pastor has become vitally important. And I think that's wrong. The pastor is not the church. And any church that makes the pastor the church has a real problem.
It seems I've heard you've talked to, I don't really quite get what the pastoring job description's quite about, but from what you've said, I've heard people say that pastors are a little bit like therapists, except they don't have the specific training and all the issues that people come to them with, and they don't get paid like therapists, and they don't get to, you know, end the session on the hour.
That's
They're
true.
always available. And they just don't have the protections that, like, they don't do supervision. I don't know if you know what I'm referring to, but therapists
Yeah.
report to other therapists
Yeah.
in case they kind of have problems that are potentially aware of, that they're aware of or not aware of, coming up with a client, so that they have someone to go to saying, you know, whatever they have that's being troublesome. So it's a sort of a pressure relief valve, you know, that protects the client and everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, maybe that's part of, I'm sure there is informally pastors that can go to other people.
Yep.
And
Well, pastors, so on one hand, so the pastoral role, it's sort of like a therapist because people come to you and they tell you their stuff. And so there's a therapy aspect to that, but it's not, we don't really do psychotherapy because we're not therapists, and hopefully we're not thinking we are because we heard something on TV and we've watched Dr. Phil. But there's so many, I mean, the pastor is a pre-modern vocation in that it's a generalist. So you're doing a little bit of scholarship, you're doing public speaking, you're listening to people, you're cleaning, you're fixing toilets, in a small church, you're managing things, you're running programs, it's such a diverse vocation. And the beauty of that is you can integrate between the silos. The difficulty with it is you can never really specialize to go down. So in a context like ours, you do pastoral care, and some people you'd say you really need a therapist, and other people they need confession or they need consolation. And it's different from therapy because you don't have the box that therapy uses, and the relationships are much more fluid. So no, you're very right. But that's part of the gig.
yeah, what you said, I thought of that because of what you said, that the pastor being the church and the focus just sounds like a crushing responsibility. And my
Unless
mom,
you're a narcissist.
oh boy, yeah. Yeah,
So, but that's the problem, is that with every vocation, you have temptations within it. And so if the church is putting you up on a pedestal, and you really like pedestals, you get up, at some point you're going to realize some of the reasons they put you on the pedestal is so you're a nice target. And so you will learn that too. There are reasons people promote other people, and not all of them are good ones. So, but built in then within Christianity, there are, who is supposed to be the pastor? He's supposed to be the servant of all. So Christianity does a lot of interesting things with hierarchy and moving pieces around. So if you're, as a pastor, you're working your vocation, just like we started out talking about Jesus, in some moments you have authority and you say, this is what God says, and you'd better do it. In other moments, you are the servant of all, and so you suffer with and for your people. And you do you like Jesus in John 13, you strip down, put on the servant's towel, and you wash the people's feet. And you're the pastor who, cares for the flock. So it's very integrated vocation.
Hmm. There's just so much. There's just so much in all of this.
Yeah.
The acting it out is a key and intriguing kind of piece of it. If you can keep all of that wisdom and all of those stories and all of these aspects of it, all kind of online, sort of available. Hmm.
It's you know, I've seen pastors when they hit their 50s and they're done with the church because it's just been hard service and they want to find an administrative job in a denomination or something. They just want to get out. My father, when he was in his 60s, he was near retirement, and I asked him, I said, Dad, you still like it? And he said, I like it better than ever. And when he retired, he just didn't have to do some of the administrative stuff he was never good at and didn't like, and cared for people and led Bible studies and preached. And just, my mother was shocked. She's like, why is he going into his office? I said, Mom, he's not going to stop doing what he's always done. That's what he loves to do. And, he did that until the day he died. He died meeting with someone in a coffee shop and dropped dead right there at the table. Just a heart attack, boom, gone. And, I think I talked to him the day before because he had some medical things. And I said, how you feeling, Dad? And he said, I feel fine. And the next day, he was gone. And I think, whereas I would have loved to have said goodbye and all of those kinds of things, that wasn't a bad way for him to go. Now, he also tended to pastor in small churches where again, like a family, the relationships were face to face. And it's, it's a different type of thing than your 1,000-member congregation with the smoke machine and the lights and all of that stuff. And so
I don't think I'd ever set foot in one of those.
But so my father inhabited this vocation, and I learned from him. He never sat down and instructed me. I learned because the first 18 years of my life, I didn't know I was watching him, but I was. And then as, I went to college and stuff, but I always watched and learned from him. And so he's the one that taught me so much of what I know, even though he was probably the least directive person I've ever known. He almost never told anybody what to do, but he lived it.
I remember you saying he was extremely nice.
Yeah, very nice man. Very seldom. I only saw him angry 2 or 3 times, and those are mostly frustration. But he could, if need be direct with people, and I did see him with that. I get more of my directness from my mother, who, in terms of their relationship, if my father had been managing the family, we all would have been in trouble. So my mother was she played those roles, and that's how marriages work. But I got some from both of them. But no, I learned pastoring from my father. And ironically, I never wanted to be a pastor. I, in sort of ways, backed into parish ministry. I always wanted to be a teacher. But once I started doing this, and I'm not a perfect pastor. There are areas of my vocation that aren't great, but here I am, and I'm still doing it. 21 years in one place. So we're not busting at the seams. There's plenty of empty chairs, and people on the internet say, well, a lot of people would like to be in Paul Vanderklay's church. It's like, well, not a lot of them in Sacramento. But now we have these meetups going, and it's complicated, but again, it's like a family.
How many, what's your church attendance like when you said big church?
50.
50. Yeah, well, that's not.
That's average in America, actually.
Yeah, I was going to say that doesn't strike me as tiny. It's not like 12.
No, 50, but it's right on the border of, if you want to have a full-time pastor, it's tough to be viable at that size. Just in terms of, salary and building and all the things. It takes about, depending if your building is paid for, the churches aren't expensive things, but they, you want to have your electricity on and pay the pastor and have him not be bivocational. It costs money.
Yeah.
So,
there's,
so I might become bivocational YouTube / local church pastor. It seems to be going that way in the last 6 months, which is totally weird.
yeah. Yeah, I was thinking that's, I mentioned to someone lately, like there is getting to be kind of like the church,
Yeah. Yeah.
But you don't strike me as a televangelist.
One of my deacons he worked for Apple, and he used to, take these pictures of my head and put them on these big purple suits and send them to me. It's we just laugh. Oh, no, yeah. But, hey, here we are. No one was more surprised than me when people started watching my YouTube channel. The main thing was the Freddie and Paul show and my sermons, and hardly anybody wanted to watch that. And I started talking about Jordan Peterson, and whoosh. So, and that's how this whole thing got going.
Yeah, I've sometimes thought, the other thing I've thought about Jordan that, well, one thing is we have a lot of things in common. I mean, I grew up in a small mining kind of town, and it was real hard scrabble. And I'm kind of very open to lots of things, and he seems to be that way. I don't know what, we're about the same age, but where was I going with that?
Well, how did you find him?
Just I was going to just say, his presentation is really good. His thinking is very clear.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just our personalities clicking, but there's like a hunger for truth right now or something. And I find it just extraordinary that people find him like offensive and controversial.
I know. Like you started out saying that a lot of the stuff he says, it's kind of like, that's controversial?
Yeah. But then I've been saying for a while, like, like with how small your church is, maybe or Jordan, it's like truth is very unpopular right now. I don't know. It's a strange thing, but I found him. I guess I don't quite know where I first ran across him. It might have been one of the good things that the Google suggestions recommended videos or something came up with. And something on his channel, this was about 2 years ago, but I listened to all his courses first, the personality course and then the maps of meaning course. Just one series of them, even though I have realized that each year is somewhat different. But Jordan, I don't know, he works in a lot of his ideas into almost anything he talks about.
Yeah.
But then I got into all the Joe Rogan and other personalities that the intellectual dark web as it's expanded, and in the Bible lectures. I wish he would get back to that. I haven't followed his book tour too much. I'm too much of a groupie, I guess. He came to Minneapolis, but I wasn't very inclined to go, And I've seen him a lot on YouTube, and it's free, and
That's hilarious.
I don't know.
Totally get that. I totally get that.
The experience would be fun, but I guess I've seen that on YouTube though.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. When I went, his talk was fine, but I've heard his stuff. The interesting thing for me was the people. Who was there? Why are they there? What are they doing? What do they want from him? What do they need in life? Again, that's my pastor. Pastors are kind of sheepdogs. We're looking to take care of people. So.
Yeah. And I guess I'm not I don't know. I've noticed there's what you say about young men now. Sometimes it's just really obvious that they're not being brought into adulthood with people to talk to or something.
Yeah.
And he's talking to them.
Yeah.
That I maybe I'm not a 20-something that quite responds to him quite the same way, the same issues. But yeah, that's something I've noticed, and there's a whole lot of issues there that are quite interesting to me. But it's alarming, you know. I'd almost put it as this society's got a death wish the way we're treating our young men these days.
That's right.
They aren't going away, and we need them.
No, most of my meetups are young men, and last night in particular, I thought there were some really good conversations between them, just working on stuff. And you know, again, as a pastor, until this, I haven't been able to create a forum where I saw that happening like I've seen it through this. So I'm just taking it a day at a time and trying to be more helpful.
Is that going well?
Yeah, it's going very well. You know, I'm trying to figure out how to be more helpful, how to scale it, because, you know, we usually have between 10 and 20 people show up at a meetup. And that's good. We can't handle much more than that. We'll break up into small groups now. But the problems are that they're churches, as you know, you well know, churches aren't doing well with this group. Some, you know, but usually those are the people that grew up in the church, or some churches that rescue them out of prison. But there's a real scale problem, and this, especially for many young men, figuring out how men and women are going to find each other in a productive way to create homes, healthy homes for the next generation. That's always a hard thing. But I think our culture is working at cross purposes to it now. And if I were the age of my sons, it's not easy.
Yeah, that's kind of a hot button issue for me. Those you mentioned that masculinist newsletter.
Yeah,
I've read a lot of that, and that's a very worthwhile discussion. And of course, that's how you start a family, right?
Yeah,
and not blow it up and turn it into something awful.
Yeah, yeah.
So. What do you mean by cross purposes?
I think the job of culture is to help the individuals be successful. And I don't think our culture is helping young men and young women build the kinds of relationships where children can come into this world and be raised in a healthy way.
Oh, okay. There you go.
I think we're telling young men and especially young women, be selfish, you know, demand. Okay. That's basically antithetical to being a mother. A mother is the archetype of giving. A mother gives birth to a child at the risk of her life and sacrifices her life day in and day out for years for the sake of the child. And fathers too. Fathers give up their freedom. They give up their autonomy. They give up their, you know, sowing wild oats, their sexual satisfaction, and they pour themselves into the next generation. And if they do that for 20 or 25 years, hopefully out of there comes a healthy next generation that can continue to do that and do the family thing and do everything else. And if we as a culture can't navigate that transmission, we're done. Because dysfunctional families produce, you know, adults, and now just like we started this conversation, no family is perfect, but there are ranges, and we want to do as well as we can. And as a culture, we can't even agree on what those rules are. That's again where we get back to Jordan Peterson, and we don't have a framework.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really disagreeing, but I would almost say the rules are apparently now, the single parent family is almost getting to be the norm, and child support is really a father's role.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that's really certain, right?
Yeah.
That's far more certain than lifetime marriage, right?
Yeah. But Peterson did an interview with, I forget who the guy was, about fatherhood, and had this list of 75 things that children need from their fathers. And my father ministered in the Black community where the rates of single mother parenthood were where the whole culture is getting in now. And so all of my life I've seen the cost of that. And children need more from their father than just financial support. And we don't even, so he's got a list of 75. I'm sure that's just the tip of the iceberg. And who I am, I learned from my father. And again, he's the least directive person I've ever known. But I just learned watching him. Well, what if he's not there to watch? Well, then you're going to be looking around and watching others. Well, what if there are no one is fathering in the community? Then what do you learn?
Yeah, I think that's part of Jordan's appeal. They're seeing a father figure that they've never seen before.
Yeah. I forget who it was. I don't know, Joe Rogan or someone mentioned, he's kind of the uncle that, you need a father, but you also need an uncle, because sometimes an uncle can say things to you the father can't, because the relationship with the father is too complicated. So the uncle comes in and says, hey, stop, knucklehead, wham, get back to work. I love you, but you got to get back to work.
They go away for a week so that can kind of like cool down and sink in. And
that's right.
Without ripping the scab off right away.
That's right. Well, I gotta land the plane here, Allan. I would love to post this, because I think this has been, I think a lot of people will enjoy this conversation, and because I get a lot of questions about the church, and I love how you framed the church and its importance. And so I don't know, if you're willing, I'd like to post this, because I think this has just been a lovely conversation.
Yeah, we didn't get into things that were stuff I probably wouldn't want on YouTube. So
we could do that some other time.
Yeah. And I didn't say anything that I think, well, I'm self-employed, so they can't fire me too easily. So.
That's right. And I'll just say, any pastors out there watching, if you're in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, this guy does not have a church home. And if you want to have coffee with him to try and recruit him, send me your email and I'll send it to him. So
there you go. We'll see what happens.
That's right. Well, thank you so much for this, Allan. This has really been a treat. And I just really appreciate your wisdom, and you've really integrated, I can see how you've integrated so much of what you've learned in your life. And you might not have a 1.5 million subscribers on YouTube, but I can see you're chock full of wisdom, and I certainly have benefited from it today.
Well, I hope so. I mean, you're very generous with your time, your videos. I really have appreciated. I've listened to them even all the way through some of the 2-hour ones. And sometimes I've listened to them over again, and there's just a lot in them. And they obviously take a lot of time and thought and effort. So I appreciate all that you're doing.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Just want to be helpful. So
yeah, I think you're reaching a lot of people.
Thank you.
Well, take care, Paul.
All right. Well, you have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.